This meeting is being recorded.
And I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody. Okay. All right, a few more people coming in. That's good. All right. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and start this presentation. And I will try to let folks in as they come in. Right now, we've got about 18 people. We had about 30 that were registered. So this is a brand new presentation that was recently created, both by myself and my mom, Shirley Baum, helped me out. There's a lot of creepy stuff. I think probably the creepiest that kind of got to me are the zombie beetles. I saw a video on YouTube of a hollowed out beetle that was just kind of walking along with no cares in the world. And it was a little creepy to me. And I thought, you know, that would probably make a really good presentation. Now, I can only touch on just a handful of parasites that are out there. I mean, there are some of the modes by which parasites work in the natural world is really scary. And I think maybe some of you, I've been watching it, but there's a movie, or not, sorry, movie, but it's a TV series called The Last of Us. It's based on a video game, and it uses cordyceps fungus as its zombie creating mechanism in this TV show. It's either on HBO Max or it's on Netflix. I don't remember which one, but it's actually really good. It's an interesting TV show. It spotlights more on the people and the characters and that kind of stuff than it does on the cordyceps fungus. But when I saw that was coming out, I got all excited. I was like, that's actually kind of cool that they've pulled this fungus that will mostly inhabit insects and mind control them, and they took that and they threw that into the world of TV and made it take over humans, which thankfully is not going to happen. But it did highlight to me that this would be kind of a cool subject to bring to light, and that we could talk about some of the weird and interesting ways that viruses and other types of parasites will take over or mind control insects. Now, this is mostly insects, mollusks. I've got a few plants in there, things like that. Please note that there are an awful lot of parasites that inhabit humans as well. I didn't talk about any of those here, not really. There are some sidelines where they also can inhabit humans and can cause some problems. But for the most part, it's just animals, lower level animals, insects, mollusks, things like that here that I'll be talking about. All right, so let's go all the way back to our high school and college classes when we were learning about parasites and what they are and what they aren't. A parasite is an organism that lives in or with another living organism, and they use that organism to get their food or their nutrients so that they can grow and multiply. This usually happens in that they will either directly or indirectly harm the host, a lot of times killing the host in the process. Although ultimately that's not the end goal, although it is in some of these instances here. So the parasite is going to benefit through the shelter, the food, transportation, reproduction, the growth of the host. And the parasite usually undergoes some type of a metamorphosis. So it's going to change from one form to another during its life cycle on or inside the host. And a lot of these that we'll be talking about are actually called obligate parasites. And that means that they have to have a living host to grow and complete their life cycle. So one thing that I like to try to do if I'm introducing a new subject, something that maybe has a lot of unpacking to do, a lot of interesting information to teach, is I like to highlight the words that I think are important here so that you can maybe go, oh, I learned a couple new words with my vocabulary today, which is always a good thing. So again, I'm not going to dive really deep into parasitology. It can get pretty mind-bending, and even some of the life cycles as I was going through and choosing the individual insects and mollusks and the plants, it even got to me, and I've taken multiple parasitology courses, so I left those out, but these are kind of interesting cases. So we kind of need to talk about the different types of underneath that parasite umbrella, if you will. And so mutualism is when two organisms work together to benefit each other. Now, again, these are all throughout the animal kingdom. It can be plants, it can be flowers, it can be insects, it can be mammals, it can be anything. There's all sorts of organisms out there that could be in a mutualistic type relationship, or commensalism, or parasitism. So here's a few options, if you will, that you guys might recognize and appreciate. So mutualism, when the two organisms work together. So the mycorrhizae, that little fungus that kind of grows on plant roots and helps. I mean, heck, we buy, I think it's soil 3, maybe, that's inoculated with that. But I mean, we go out of our way to buy soil in bags that comes pre-inoculated with this fungus. And it will grow with the root system of the plant, and it'll send out its little tendrils. And those help collect the nutrients and the water and all that kind of stuff. And then that fungus also feeds off the sugars and the nutrients that the plant provides. It's not harming the plant, but it is providing an extension to the root system, if you will. So a plant that has a lot of these little fungal organisms around its roots, in and around its roots, is going to do better generally, and is going to be able to process more water and nutrients and grow healthier if that's present. One we don't think about too often, bees and flowers. Flowers have developed this really fantastical way of attracting different types of insects. Working with my mom right now, thinking about how can we kind of put together an interesting presentation where we talk about the different types of flowers, how they appear to different types of pollinators, because they're wanting to attract specific types of pollinators. So I'm sure most of you probably know, if you don't, insects kind of see in a UV spectrum that's going to be different than what we see. And so if you just want to have your mind blown, go online and take a look, type into the search bar and say, how do bees see flowers? And you're going to see a different kind of waves, light spectrum there. You're going to see some UV light and how they see that. And it'll be different patterns. I mean, we see it, maybe just see a yellow flower, but they don't see that. They might see something with white or ultraviolet, like purple patterns and things like that. And that really explains why we see certain types of insects on certain types of plants. For instance, mountain mint, you might see a lot of wasps on mountain mint, but you don't see many butterflies. Whereas on an abelia, you might see tons of butterflies, but not very many wasps. And you have to wonder, why is that? Well, if we dive down into how those insects are looking at that particular flower, there's probably an answer there. So there may be, presentation coming up at some point with that. So that's a mutualistic relationship. The bee gets the pollen and the flower gets fertilized. So, I mean, that relationship works. Commensalism, and that's when two organisms interact and one benefits and the other isn't really harmed or helped by it. It's just kind of there. So just as a little aside, you could see there's burdock or cocklebur. They're kind of in the same family. When I was a little kid in third grade, I think, or second grade, I had really long hair. And we were out on a field trip and I just thought I was going to have fun. And as we were crossing a creek, I thought, I don't want to cross right there where everybody else is. I'm going to race and get across and beat everybody. And I went headlong into a burr bush and it was in my hair. And so then the rest of the afternoon, the teacher spent trying to pull the burrs out of my hair, and everybody else was having fun. And I was sitting there crying because I had a head full of burrs. That was not very pleasant. It didn't really harm me other than just making me really sad that I couldn't go and play with my classmates. But that bush, if I had, it had just attached to my jacket or something like that, the seeds, it could have dropped someplace else. And then that's how it's going to get distributed. And then another one that a lot of us have in our house are these little epiphytes or the air plants. I have a thing of air plants hanging behind me that you can't see. I mist them with water periodically and they're perfectly happy, but we have air plants are everywhere. You go into Kroger and you see them, attached to stuff. They get glued to things. They just kind of hang out. They're not really harming or doing anything. They're just kind of hanging out there. They'll grow in tropical areas up in the branches of the trees. And they're pretty neat little plants. They require very little maintenance other than occasional misting. And then we come to parasitism, which is what we're talking about here. And that's when two organisms interact and one is harmed and the other is helped. So here you see a couple of classic examples of parasitism. You've got the ant and the cordyceps fungus, and you have the tomato hornworm with the parasitic wasp larva. So, in this case, both of them end up dead. It's just how it happens. And, that's how reproduction happens for those species. So what is a zombie insect parasite? Oh, that's a good question. So some of us may have seen these creepy hollowed out beetles walking across the parking lot. Some of you may have seen ants that have, in this case, you've got a spore that's kind of sticking out of the top of the ant. And, that you may have seen that. I can say I've not seen one or really looked for them, but that doesn't mean that they're not out there. So in this case, and we'll talk a little bit about these mind control type parasites. And then I've thrown a few other types of parasites in there, insect plant type parasites that don't really mind control, but are still kind of cool. So these particular predatory parasites are going to manipulate their insect hosts and turn them into zombies, essentially, through neurochemical controls. And there's a reason they're trying to do that. And why I thought it was so interesting and why I wanted everybody to kind of to see this and learn a little bit about it is because it's just so fantastic that this actually happens in nature. It's very, very creepy. So they can make their hosts do anything from providing food for their young, to guarding their eggs and their offspring, to even committing suicide. I mean, not kidding when I say it's all mind control, because basically it's going to invade that insect's central nervous system, which is very simple. That, like I said, they're not really going to take over us and make us do this kind of stuff because we have a much more complex nervous system. But it's interesting how they can do this. And then they can have particular behaviors and basically control the insect to do what it wants it to do, which is, again, very freaky. The other thing to be to note is that these parasites are all host specific. So over time, they have adapted structurally or functionally to that one particular host organism. So that's pretty interesting. And thankfully, you're not going to see the whole the Last of Us scenario. That can be kind of concerning. All right, so just some examples. Rabies, that's a viral parasite, and it can cause very severe symptoms in its host, including irritability, extreme aggression, biting, fear of light and water. And that serves to the biting part to transmit the virus. So, the animal, maybe a raccoon or something like that, loses its fear of light and water, and suddenly it's out there during the day. I mean, we've all seen those horrific videos of a raccoon that starts attacking somebody in the middle of the day. And because normally they would be out during the evening, and when we're not out there, and so they're out, basically crazy from the parasite, and that's how they're going to transmit it. Sleeping sickness. So this parasite is a trypanosome or a small worm. And you can see I've got a couple of examples next to it here. So this is the tsetse fly, and then this is what the trypanosome parasite looks like here. Toxoplasmosis, I don't have a picture of that, but that's a single-celled parasite that infects rodents. We'll talk about that one because that one is super creepy. It invades the brain of the rodent. It gets the rodent to where it's not scared of cats anymore, and then hypersexualizes it, making it think that cat urine is an aphrodisiac. So again, very, very weird. Mostly we're concerned about it because it can damage a fetal brain cells. So you have to be really careful. That's why they tell you not to change litter box if you're pregnant, because the cat may be carrying that. Then there's the parasitic wasp. And hang on a second, I'm letting some additional people in here. The parasitic braconid wasp, and that female is going to lay her eggs on the tomato hornworm, similar to what you see there. Those eggs hatch, and then they just kind of feed on the insides of that caterpillar, and then they'll make their way back out, spin those cocoons, and fly off, and that completes their life cycle, leaving that poor caterpillar to basically be weak and die because it's basically been fed on. And then there's other types of parasitism like mistletoe, which we see that a lot in the trees around here. That'll grow, the seeds land on the branches there, and then the roots will grow down into the cambium layer, and then they basically feed off the nutrients of the tree. Ringworms, hookworms, tapeworms, lice, mosquitoes, there's all sorts of things. I really don't go into any of the internal parasites here, or even at the ectoparasites like lice. None of the mammals like vampire bats. I will talk about dodder a little bit because it's kind of weird and it's also creepy. You can see that up in the Blue Ridge Parkway, up in that area. All right. Let's move on. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the marauder ants and the Ophiocordyceps fungus, or we'll just call it cordyceps. So this is going to be very species specific. Or cordyceps, there are about 600 or 700 different species of cordyceps out there. You can actually buy it and eat it. It's a nutritional supplement that's out there. I mean, personally, I don't know, The Last of Us kind of creeped me out, so I don't really want to do it. But I know on my Facebook feed, they've been plugging this mushroom coffee because it's supposed to have lots of nutritional benefits. And cordyceps is one of the fungal, fungi that are in there. And there's just a little part of me that's like, yeah, I don't know about that. It's fine, but to each his own. But this parasite is going to synthesize brain chemicals to force this ant to climb to the top of a blade of grass. So it's going to do that. So it's going to take over that ant's mind and body, and it's going to force it to walk up to that grass, that up the blade of grass, up to the very tippy top. And then that ant is going to use its pinchers to grab on to that blade of grass. And once it's there, it's basically going to die. And then the fungus completes its life cycle by sending up a fruiting body through the ant's body, and then it's going to release those spores. So the interesting thing is that in the case of the ant, a lot of the worker ants can actually recognize the signs of an infected ant. So they'll actually remove it before it has a chance to sporulate, and take it far away from the nest. So there is, some innate behavior there, and but it's a constant battle. The fungus wants to reproduce and parasitize as many ants as possible, and the ants are constantly going, that one's acting a little weird over there, we better get him and move him out of here. All right. So did you know that researchers have identified over 200 different species of cordyceps that can infect up to 10 insect orders? That's a lot of different individual species of cordyceps that can infect these different insect species. That to me alone is really creepy, but it does have its good uses. So cordyceps can be used as a biocontrol. So over in Africa, they have locusts over there that are nothing compared. I mean, they're huge compared to our little grasshoppers over here. I mean, these insects can be like 5, 6, 7 inches long, and they can do a lot of damage to crops. So what they've done is there's actually a biocontrol, and this falls under integrated pest management, is that they've isolated the fungal spores from that particular species of cordyceps. They mix it with a carrier, and then they crop dust their wheat fields. And all the locusts that are in there, there's a really high likelihood that they're going to be infected. So they've seen upwards of 75 to 80% death in those locusts if they crop dust their fields with this particular species of cordyceps. And the nice thing is it's very species specific, so it's only going to get that particular species of locust. It's perfectly fine for humans and for other animals to be around there. You don't have to worry about it infecting them. So it does a really good job of being a good biocontrol, and it's not toxic. It's not going to hurt us while we're using it. So I had to throw the Last of Us zombie in there. This is a clicker, and this is what their version of cordyceps looks like after it takes over a human, which is pretty creepy. Thankfully it's not like The Walking Dead where they're out all over the place eating people, but it's still interesting how they've taken this fungus and kind of woven it into the storyline of this particular TV show. But when we go to reality, it's probably more like Interstellar. So if any of you are sci-fi fans, you've probably watched Interstellar. The whole basis of this movie is how there's a virus that has somehow figured out how to cross over into multiple crop species, and is basically destroying all of the crops on Earth and making it so that we're all going to starve. So Matthew McConaughey and some of the other folks jump in spaceships and go out and look for Goldilocks planets. Those are the ones that ultimately can sustain human life. They go look at a bunch of Goldilocks planets looking to see if there's a place that we can all move to. But that's the more likely scenario, not the one where we have giant zombie fungi running around trying to get us. Okay, so this is just a video that I posted. So this is what you're going to see with the cordyceps fungus. And I've tried to do this here and there where I can to show you what it looks like after the fungus inhabits the insect and causes insect or causes it to sporulate or grow. So in this case, you can see that ant has crawled up the stick. It's bit onto that stick, and now it's getting ready to sporulate. So it's sending up its tendrils, and I think it'll probably stop pretty close to before it's done. Yeah, there you go. So that just kind of shows you the behavior of the particular fungus. It's in the head. All right, so next up is the goldenrod soldier beetle and the Erniopsis fungus. And these beetles are going to mate while sitting atop a goldenrod flower. So ironically, I think I have goldenrods behind me, but just as an aside. But the fungus also lives on these flowers, which makes it super easy for it to infect these beetles when they visit. So the life cycle is going to start when the spores germinate and break through the beetle's exoskeleton. So the spores, that's what pops out of that thing in their head. And those spores eat through that chitin on the exoskeleton of that insect. And then they kind of make their way through the hemolymph, the equivalent of the blood of the insect system. And they start growing in their body, and it kind of makes it up to their, small brain, if you will. And about 2 weeks after it gets into the soldier beetle, the fungus is going to start sending chemical signals to that beetle's nervous system to climb up a plant and clamp its mandibles into the flower. And you can see that's actually what's happened here. So that beetle climbs up to the top of the flower and it just bites down really hard. And then it dies. And then you can see on its abdomen, that's actually all fungus. That beetle does not look like that normally, but as that fungus grows, it starts to grow out of the beetle's abdomen. So the abdomen gets this really big bulbous look. And the wings will actually, which were probably closed before, start to open up like this. And that allows the more exposure to those fungal spores, and it actually adds as an attractant for the healthy beetles that are flying around. So for infected male beetles, pretty much that's the end of the line. They're not going to do anything more, okay? But for the females, when they're on top of the flower, typically the male is going to be looking for them so they can reproduce, right? So when the male comes over and she's going to have this posture with her wings up, she's dead. She doesn't even know what's going on. And he's going to attempt to mate with the zombie female. And so by doing that, he becomes infected and then he continues to spread it around. So did you know that 20% of the beetles in this population can be infected? So they did a little study, and I can always tell you where you can find that if you're interested, but they looked in this goldenrod field at about almost 450 individual beetles. And of those 450 beetles, 20% were infected with this. That's actually a pretty high load, but given their behavior and that they're basically, all out in this goldenrod field looking for a good time at about the same time, it's very easy to see how that can spread within a population. Next up, crickets and the horsehair worm. So Nematomorpha, it's a roundworm, and it lays its eggs in water, and the eggs will hatch into larvae there. So those newly hatched larvae are going to kind of insist on leaves. Insisting is just a way that they protect themselves from harsh environments. And they're going to insist on leaves near the edge, where they're then eaten by crickets and grasshoppers who are eating vegetation. So that juvenile worm is then going to bore through the gut wall of that cricket or grasshopper, and they enter the body cavity, and they'll live there quite happily for about 2 to 3 months, and they're going to feed off of that cricket. But then it's time to complete the life cycle. So what is it going to do? It's going to mind control that cricket and force it to seek water. So crickets don't typically look for water, but this one is. And the whole reason behind it is so that that worm can emerge out of that abdomen on that cricket or that grasshopper. I thought it was a little gross, so I didn't want to add in a video of that, but I could probably always find one if we wanted to look at it. But it is pretty graphic. Essentially, the cricket's going to fall into or be around the shoreline, because it's been attracted to the water, and that's the cue for that worm to emerge. And they can get up to 14 inches long. So, I mean, as you can see, there's not much left inside the abdomen of that cricket. The good news is this does not parasitize people, livestock, or pets. And there are other species of this nematomorpha that will parasitize different insects and arachnids, or the spiders. So there's a lot of these out there. Okay, next up, bumblebees and Apocephalus and the Borealis fly. So this particular fly is going to inject its eggs into the abdomen of a bumblebee, a honeybee, or a paper wasp. You can see the little red arrows. That's kind of an indication of where that larva is, and you can probably see that there. So as soon as the eggs hatch, they feed on the flight muscles and the hemolymph, or that's the blood in an insect. And that bee's behavior is going to immediately start to change. So it's going to lose control. I mean, obviously, if somebody's munching on your flight muscles, but it's going to lose control. It'll fly very chaotically. It'll lose its balance, bumble into things. And then the weird thing, the bee is going to leave its hive at night. Now, most honeybees, or any type of ground-dwelling bee or bee, in fact, they're not nocturnal. They are active during the daytime. So this is a different behavior for that bee. So that bee is going to leave its hive at night, and it's going to fly for a few miles and land on the ground someplace. And then a few days later, a cluster of maggots are going to erupt from that bee's body, and they're going to pupate, and then the adults will emerge. So it's forcing that bee to, move and go, wherever. It's just wanting to disperse and get away from that hive. So that's what it's doing. It's dispersing. Okay, next up, caterpillar, and let's see if I can mangle this one or not. Glyptopanelese wasp. So this wasp is found in North and Central America, and it protects, just like a bodyguard. It's called bodyguard manipulation. It protects those eggs from predators, which is pretty cool. The wasp is going to inject its eggs into the caterpillar. So just like the braconid wasp that you saw, and it'll just continue munching leaves like it is, doesn't seem very affected by it. And then that can be up to about 80 larvae, I guess, is what I'm seeing here. And they're going to grow inside that caterpillar. Well, then they're going to exit that caterpillar and they're going to pupate, but there will be a few that remain behind and sacrifice themselves for the good of their brothers and sisters. So what they're going to do is they're going to mind control that caterpillar to force it to guard the rest of its brothers and sisters, which is kind of creepy. So I've actually got a little video. So you can see here, the video will just play over and over again. I'll let it do that a couple. So you see that little bug down at the bottom? It's crawled up, probably none the wiser to what's going on. And that caterpillar thinks, oh, that's a threat, because you can see the eggs up there. And it just starts waving around, and its whole purpose at this point is to guard those eggs. And that's what it's doing. So that's kind of creepy, but very cool. Okay, next up, ladybugs and Dinocampus wasp. So this wasp is going to insert one egg into that ladybug. The larva will avoid all the vital organs, and it will continue to feed and sustain the larva until that larva is ready to pupate. So how that larva knows what organs inside that ladybug to avoid, I have no clue, but it gets even creepier and weirder. So when that larva is ready to leave, it's going to paralyze that ladybug before it tunnels out, and it spins a cocoon between the ladybug's legs. So it's like it's got a big canopy over the top of it, a nice chitinous canopy that's going to protect it. that ladybug is going to remain alive and crouch over the top of that cocoon for about 7 days and acts as a bodyguard. So it is kind of like that guarding behavior, guarding manipulation behavior, but not quite. It's just kind of there. It will twitch its legs a little bit. As you can see here, the cocoon's a little bit larger than with the caterpillars, but it'll twitch to keep other insects away, guarding that cocoon. And then that cocoon will, go ahead and that wasp will pupate and boom, it flies away and it's completed its life cycle. But that's not the strangest part. The strangest part is that about 25% of those ladybugs will actually regrow ingested internal parts and recover and leave. Yeah, I know, that's really weird, right? Yeah, I thought that was pretty, just very odd. That ladybug might be there for a little bit longer and then it just wanders away and does its own thing. So kind of creepy. Okay, moving on to the cockroach and the Ampulex wasp, or the jewel wasp. It's a very pretty wasp. It's these pictures don't really show the rainbow hues, but it does have a rainbow hues. I know nobody really likes cockroaches, so this one, it's probably like, yay, why can't we have more of these wasps? But this wasp is going to inject venom into that cockroach twice, once to temporarily disable the front legs, and then the second time to the brain to disable its an escape behavior. We all know how when we turn a light on and the roaches scuttle away, it's going to disable that. It knows how to do that. The wasp does. So that cockroach is then going to remain very quiet, and it's then led back to the wasp's burrow. It's like a calm dog. It's going to lead that back to the wasp's burrow by pulling on the antennae. And then it lays an egg in between that roach's legs, and then it seals it in there. And it's horrible. It's a living food supply for that grub that's in there, the larva. It's just going to eat it from the inside out, which is, not that sad because nobody really likes roaches, but eventually it'll pupate and then you'll see it emerge. And so that top picture that you see there is actually that little wasp as it is emerging from the dead cockroach. It takes about a month. So we need a lot more of these particular wasps, don't you think? All right, cicadas and Massospora fungus. So they did a study in Virginia when they had the 13 or 17-year cicadas, and they had a good number of them that were infected with this particular fungus. Now, there are all types of cicadas. There's some that emerge every year. There are some that emerge 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Usually they're odd years. 13 years, 17 years. I mean, there's all different types of cicadas. I mean, the life cycles are all over the map. But these cicadas, when they're infected with these spores, they're just going to move around normally. When basically their entire abdominal cavity has been replaced by a big chunk of spore that looks like chalk. So sometime right before they die, that rear segment of their abdomen will fall off, and there's this white chalky plug of fungus that produces spores. It also will create this really hypersexual behavior. And so even though they're basically dead, their sexual parts don't even exist anymore, it's fallen off, it's going to go around trying to mate with everything to spread the spores. So the male cicada is going to flick its wings like the female, and then unsuspecting males are going to be drawn into that. So that's pretty creepy. How does it know to do that? That's kind of cool. So they're going to come in contact with an affected cicada, and then it's just going to wait for the next generation. So yeah, pretty cool. And you can see here, I've got I think a couple little snippets of video. Here's one. This insect is dead, and it's just crawling up the tree like it's alive. It has no abdomen, nothing. There's no guts in there whatsoever. It's all just a big plug of fungus. And I mean, that one's really, it's going fast. So, yeah, creepy. Okay, grasshoppers, bees, and Streptostera. These are obligate parasites. If you remember what I said on the first part, it is that obligate parasites require, like, they don't have a choice. Obligate just basically means they don't have a choice. They have to have that particular host to complete their life cycle. So they're species specific on various bees and wasps, and the males are free flying. So they'll seek out mates, and the females live entirely in the host's body. So these little, you can see kind of up at the very tippy top there on the life cycle that I posted. That's what the male, free living male looks like. And that female's stuck on the host's body. And they'll mate and produce eggs. And they're going to cause sterility in the insect hosts. The eggs will hatch in there. They consume the body. And then the larva will hatch, move outside, and they'll hitchhike on another host back to its home nest. So these parasitic larvae are going to enter the host larva in the nest, molt into a maggot, and then they'll feed and mature into an adult. So you can usually identify these. You can see the picture on the top. In between the abdominal segments, you can kind of see, you might be able to see them sticking out a little bit, and you can actually pull them out. So if you were to take the bee or the wasp, you can, take a pair of tweezers and go in there and like actually pull the parasite out. So it's kind of gross. I watched a little video while I was trying to put this together, and this one poor bee had like 3 or 4 full-size parasites on there. I don't even know how it was. I just don't even know. Next, ants and the Myrmeconema. Again, I'm not that great with all of these different parasite names. It'd be easier if they were a little shorter. But this is a nematode parasite that induces a fruit mimicry in a tropical ant. So this is a South American ant, and typically it's going to have a black abdomen or gaster. That's the hindmost region in its abdomen. And normally it's a black ant. But when this nematode is ingested, it turns that abdomen or the gaster into a red berry color to mimic what you see here, the fruits of this particular tree. So the ants are going to walk around with these red gasters in a very elevated position, kind of like it's a berry sticking up, waving it around. And that's to attract the birds. So the birds are going to come, they're going to eat that infected ant thinking it's a berry. And then the eggs that develop in the intestinal tract in that bird, and then that bird passes out the fecal matter. And then those eggs are picked up by the ants and fed to their larvae, and then they migrate to the gaster and mature, and then that's the life cycle. It just goes on and on. So in this case, you've got determinate, indeterminate type host, that kind of thing. But it's pretty cool. I mean, it's changing the color of the ant and making it more conspicuous for birds to come find it and eat it. Next up, the orb spider and the Hymenopicum. I'm not even going to try that one, sorry. So this is a Costa Rican wasp, and it paralyzes the spider with the venom, and then it'll glue an egg on the abdomen of that orb weaver. So after a couple weeks, that larva is going to inject some type of a chemical controlling that spider's behavior, and it's going to modify that spider's web building behavior. So you can see a normal orb weaver has a very nice symmetrical web, but when it's getting close to where it's getting ready to pupate, that chemical is going to induce that spider to not spin this really fantastic web that it normally would, but it's going to build a very strong web with a hanging cocoon. And that's to support the wasp's cocoon. And finally, when that wasp emerges, it's going to kill and eat that spider. So it's like it's got somebody to protect it, to build it a nice new home, and then a food source when it emerges. So Not as creepy as some, but still creepy. This one's creepy. So I do have a video of this one. So this is actually, if you look into at the snail up at the top, it looks like, or at the bottom, it looks like it's just kind of an interesting mollusk with some colorful adaptations for its eye stalks, right? That's what it looks like. But that's not actually what it is. That's actually the parasite. The mollusk, if you look at the one on the top, it looks like there's probably one or two in there. And then the other eye stalk is completely normal. So that's what the snail should look like. But this particular flatworm is going to breed inside the digestive tract, and then the eggs are excreted out in the feces of the snail. The snail's an intermediate host. So there's two hosts here. The snail is an intermediate host, and it's going to eat the feces with the eggs and become infected. And then those larvae kind of develop into these sporocysts in that snail's digestive tract. And those are going to form those long, swollen brood sacs that the snail will then pulse. So I'll show you in the next slide when we get there, and you can see that they pulse, which is really creepy. But those are the brood sacs. Well, snacks too, but sacs. So for whatever reason, it typically prefers the left eye stalk, but you can get different. There are obviously different snails that are different intermediate hosts and different parasites, parasitic flatworms. Some of them have different colors. You can see the red here. Some are just green, some are brown. But they spread up into the snail's eye stalks, and then they're going to pulse. So they'll move up and down, and I'll show you in the next slide. And that attracts birds. So the parasites actually mind control the snail, and they take over its motor functions, which are simple, but still. So it's going to seek out light areas. So a lot of times snails prefer to stay where it's damp and moist, on the underside of trees, that kind of thing. They're actually going to crawl up where it's sunny, out into the open. And that's because they want the parasites controlling that snail to go out there because it wants a bird to eat it. So the brood sacs are going to pulse and attract that bird to complete the life cycle. So here you can see, this is what it looks like. This one has more than, it's got like 1, 2, 3, at least 3, maybe 4 in there. So the snail's still alive. It's just kind of moving around, and it will crawl into light places that are, easily seen by a bird. You can see down in the lower right corner, that's what it looks like. So in that case, they've actually dissected and teased away the simple neural connections of the snail's brain. And then you see the brood sacs there, and they're still attached at that point. So that's what they would look like without the snail present. But you can see the life cycle up there. So it's actually pretty simple. But yeah, pretty cool how it gets manipulates the snail. But I think I saw this on a TV show for the first time, and I was like, what in the world is that? And of course, it was one of those TV shows that didn't really tell you, not until the very end. And then they mentioned that, oh, by the way, this is a parasite for the snail. And I just thought it was some fantastical species of snail, but it's not. But it is kind of cool, especially how it pulses like that to catch the bird's attention. All right, so next, snails and the Dicroclolium. This is an adult lancet liver fluke, and it lives in the liver bile duct of grazing animals. So I think this is like the only mammal, host mammal here. But the eggs are going to hatch in the first of 2 intermediate hosts. So 2, I mentioned it can get super complex. In this case, you have a very complex life cycle with 2 intermediate hosts. The snail, and it's going to create a protective cyst around the parasites and coughs up balls of mucus. So the slime balls of mucus are going to be full of those liver flukes and are then eaten by ants, which is the second intermediate host. And then the flukes wiggle their way into the ant's brain and cause it to climb up to the tip of a blade of grass and it will sit there motionless, waiting for a cow or some other grazing mammal to come along and eat it. And then that life cycle starts all over again. So obviously, the more complex the organism, sometimes the more complex these life cycles are. So this is just kind of an example of how many different steps it has to go through in order to complete its life cycle. But it's successful because it still exists. So this one, I just thought this was super creepy. It's an isopod. So it's actually a sea louse. And you can see in that poor fish's mouth, Cymathoa exua. So this isopod will crawl up, lands on the fish, crawls in through the gills, crawls up through into the mouth, and attaches itself to the fish's tongue. Now, most fish don't have a lot of a tongue in there, but they do have a little bit of one in there. And it just attaches itself to that. And then it will just feed on the blood and tissues of the tongue until it atrophies. So you can see in that top one, that little kind of white stump down there, that's what used to be the fish's tongue. So it is no longer, doesn't exist anymore. And at that point, after it's basically eaten the tongue, it'll just kind of attach itself to the remaining stump and it'll feed on the blood and mucus in the fish's mouth. But the weird thing about this one is that while it's hanging out there, it will kind of act like the fish's tongue. So it's a surrogate tongue for the rest of its life. So it's kind of gross and gruesome, but I mean, I guess it's kind of helping it in a way too. So that's just a kind of a weird one there. Next up, if you watch like River Monsters or anything like that, this one always makes it into the super creepy parasite category. So this is the candiru or the vampire catfish. And the candiru is a parasitic fish, thankfully, that does not live in North America. It is in the Amazon. And it will stalk other fish to parasitize their blood through the gills. It typically lives down at the bottom of the river where it's very murky. So because you can't see, it usually has to find an alternative way of identifying its prey. And in this case, fish will expel traces of urea and ammonia from their gills. So this little fish will use those traces of ammonia or urea to identify their hosts. So they'll swim up looking for their hosts. Well, what else might be in the Amazon River expelling ammonia? People? Yes, and this is why it gets to be one of those most frightening parasites. That's because the legends have it that if you're out there and you're not careful and you're going to the bathroom, especially if you're a male, that this little fish might swim up your urethra, and it has a couple of sharp spines, and you can see those spines down in the bottom picture there, that it will just stick out and lodge, and then it will just feed. So I think as one article I read, it said, you're probably not going to find too many urologists out in the middle of the Amazonian rainforest. And they're probably correct. So, it can block the urethra and cause lots of pain in a very short period of time. So within 2 minutes, as it's feeding, it's gotten very swollen, and then it will retract its barbs to return to the bottom of the river. But if it's in a human, it can't get out and it's stuck, and then it can die. And you see where I'm going. It can be very problematic. So yeah, it's a fish of nightmares, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. So did you know? And basically that the human urethra and its long spines. I already gave it away. All right, next up, toxoplasmosis. So when doing research for this one, it was hard to find the actual life cycle of this particular parasite because it is such a danger to pregnant moms in that they really push that on the internet. And they're like, if you're pregnant, don't clean the litter box because you could be inadvertently, exposing yourself to this parasite. You don't want to do that. So again, this one is a definitive host and an intermediate host. So 2 hosts, and this is a single-celled parasite that's going to infect most warm-blooded animals. So at least the good news is, well, like with cats and other animals, it's not going to do much of anything to you. Now, in the case of babies in utero, yes, it can. That's why they're very cautious about that. But in the case of like felids, wild and domestic cats, it's not going to really do anything. It's not going to give the cat any symptoms. But the cat is what's used in the life cycle. So in this case, the cat is going to eat that infected rodent, and the parasite is released into the digestive system of that cat and in the feces. Well, then, rodents are going to come along, and they're probably become, either through infected food or water. So, the cat goes to the bathroom, and then that washes into a puddle, and then that rodent drinks out of that puddle. Now the rodents got that parasite again. So here's where the creepy part is. So that parasite, it's going to move to the rodent's brain, where it's going to settle into that small part of the brain that processes fear and emotions, and it hijacks it. How it knows to go to that part of the brain, I don't know, but it does. It goes to that part of the brain. So rodents innately fear the smell of cat urine because they're a major predator. So over time and through evolution, they have learned that cats are something to be feared. They don't want to be anywhere near cats. But this parasite has changes the brain chemistry of this, and it causes the rodent to lose that fear. But that's not even where it stops. So it not only loses that fear, but it also enhances the activity in the part of the brain responsible for sexual behavior. So now that rodent seeks out that cat. That rodent thinks that cat urine smells like its mate. So it's actually going to seek out that cat. And it's going to make it a very easy meal for that cat, and it completes the life cycle. So it can also infect end-stage intermediate hosts, and that would be humans, pigs, cows, or sheep. In that case, it's basically a dead end, and that happens with a lot of other types of parasites too. It's, sometimes it bumbles into the wrong host, and there's, you can get complications from that too. But anyway, this one's super creepy. How does that parasite know? And in humans, the infection can cause a mild flu-like illness, and people with weakened immune systems like AIDS, pregnant women, that kind of thing, actually can get seriously ill. So that's why they usually tell you to be careful, especially if you're going to have a baby. All right, so we're almost done. I got a few other ones here. I'll try to whiz through that. Plants. So obviously I've got a lot of master gardeners on here. I think most of you are. So dodder. You can find this up in the Blue Ridge Parkway and up in the mountains. So just driving along the road, and you can look over there and you see this really orange or yellow or, brightly colored vining trailing stuff. And you're like, what is that? Well, it's dodder, which it has a lack of chlorophyll. It doesn't actually have its own chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is what's going to allow a plant to photosynthesize, and it doesn't have any. So what does it do? Well, you can see in this upper picture here, top right, it's not real clear, but what it does is it has these little tendrils, just like mistletoe, and it just kind of grows into its host, and it gets its nutrients. It's a parasite, so it gets its nutrients from the host plant. It'll parasitize a whole lot of different herbaceous and woody plants, and it's found all over the world, temperate regions, perennials, and tropical regions. Here, thankfully, it's not a perennial, but it will grow every year. So it can weaken and kill plants, reduce crop yields. and it can make plants more susceptible to other diseases too. So it's not good to have around. So once it finds a suitable host, that seedling is going to wrap around the plants and it's going to cause these specialized structures. So I know most of you should know what adventitious roots are, but these are specialized adventitious roots called haustoria, and those are inserted into the host vascular system. So it's going to lose its root that it has when it gets into that plant that it's going to parasitize, and then the root in the soil will die. So it's just a temporary structure. And then the plant's just going to grow rapidly on the host and making new attachments until it eventually kills it, covers it, or spreads to adjacent plants, similar to, like wisteria or something like that. But in this case, it's a parasite, and it's killed by frost. So in this case, it's an annual in and around where we are, but it can grow in tropical regions as well. And there it's a perennial. All right. Okay, mistletoe. So we have a lot of mistletoe around here. Mistletoe are a large group of plants, and they're parasitic on above ground parts of trees and, and shrubs. Thinking it's dinner time. So these plants have specialized roots. I mentioned this at the beginning, that are able to penetrate that host plant, and then it gets all of its nutrients, water and nutrients from its host plant. So there are full parasitic mistletoes like dwarf mistletoe and hemiparasitic mistletoe or partial parasites. And a lot of those are used for holiday decoration, like hold it up and give me a kiss, which is kind of a weird thing anyway. Why are you kissing under a parasitic plant? But all mistletoe is an obligate parasite. It can only live and reproduce on a living host. So most mistletoe species are spread by seeds, which are going to pass through the digestive tract. Usually it's a bird. And some have explosive fruits that can propel their seeds outwards. So not all of them are eaten and expelled by birds. But they only occur in the southern half of the Americas, so below a line from basically Oregon all the way through New Jersey. So if you're up in the upper peninsula of Michigan or Minnesota, you're not going to see it. And the most important species in the U.S. is the phorandendron, and that's one of the ones that you're going to basically buy in a store if you want to kiss somebody underneath it or have it in a wreath or something. But there are about 190 species total throughout the world, and only about 10 or 12 of them are here in the US. So there are about 100 different deciduous tree hosts, and you can see that in any given day if you're driving around in the wintertime around here. Just look up. Some trees are super heavy infested, and sometimes you'll just see one or two here or there. But there are quite a few different species of trees around here that it will infect. And so that's basically it. So I think 7:02, that wasn't too bad. I only went a couple over. So I'm going to stop sharing. And if anybody is interested, you can type something in there and I'll answer your questions. Or let's see what else. I need to go watch The Last of Us. Yes, you do. It's a very good TV show. There's not a whole lot of zombies and creepy stuff. So I recommend the show if you're going to watch it. Am I the only one laughing at the cicadas? Yeah. No. All right, let's see what else. The cat one reminds me of the amoeba that lives in murky water. Yes. The brain-eating amoeba. There is that one, and that is pretty scary. So, like I said, there are a lot that I didn't cover here. I mean, I left off most of the parasites that affect humans. Some of these are just, intermediate type hosts. And sorry, my phone was going off. And it's just a dead end host for the human. But I didn't figure anybody needed to hear how disgusting parasites can be truly. So I just kind of left it for the poor insects and the mollusks and maybe a few plants. Let's see what else. I'm glad I ate dinner first. Oh, yes, thank you. Very interesting. Well, I appreciate everybody coming, and hopefully you left with a little extra knowledge of parasites and how interesting they can be. I mean, sometimes I have a science mind, stuff like that just fascinates me. So I start going down that hole, and I learn a little bit, and I'm like, oh, there's even some creepier stuff. Now I was looking and found some more, and I'm like, oh, there might be a zombie parasites part 2. But that's basically it. So if nobody has any other questions, I did record this, so I'll put this up on the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, and you can always hit me up with additional questions at the office if you want. But that's basically it. So thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. Bye.